All right, folks. Well, good afternoon. Thank you all so much for coming on this slightly less warm Sunday afternoon. Not quite as hot as it's been. This is, as I'm sure you all have seen from me personally, and I've been circulating, part of the Sounding the Nation at 250 initiative of the Society for American Music. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to this QR code here. It takes you to the website. It's a speaker series. One presenter from every state is supposed to be represented to shed light on some sort of U.S. music culture or history. So this is part of this initiative. And our own Dr. Brigida Johnson is also on the website, so check it out at USC. Go Cox. Also, speaking of Gamecocks, there's another speaker series I have to shamelessly plug as well, which is our Louise E. Peak Music and Culture series. Even though this event is not technically part of it, there are similar events like this that we do throughout the fall and spring semesters. So if you want to follow along with that, that happens on Fridays, typically from 1:10 to 2. So you can also follow that QR code to sign up for our email list, or follow us on Instagram or Facebook. So we'll have that schedule up shortly. A little bit about myself, if you don't already know me. I think most people in this room probably do know me, but just in case, I'll actually introduce myself. I am Dr. Emily Allen, joint appointed actually between here in the School of Music and the Institute for Southern Studies over in the McCausland College of Arts and Sciences. So this is a project that brings both of my worlds together, right? I'm creating a new conception of how we can maybe map out the South tied to the way musical practices are executed, right? So this brings both of my disciplinary areas into play here. So I want to actually start you all with a question the way I do my 20th Century South class, which is, when you think of the South, what comes to mind? Like, what are some things that you think are truly U.S. Southern? Yes.
The heat.
The heat, yes, the heat. Yeah.
Sweet tea.
Sweet tea, yes. So we've been told sweet tea, the heat. Other examples? Yeah.
Drawl.
Drawl, yes. Yes. Definitely the drawl, yeah. These are all, yeah.
Football.
Football? Yes. Football is very, very Southern now, certainly, yeah. So there's all these different touch points, right, that unify us as a region, right? There's all kinds of literal mapping that people sometimes do of the South, but we sometimes use other characteristics, right? Our SEC football culture, our foods, our very actually diverse accents that we have here in the South. And then even thinking about this region within the rest of the country, there's ebbs and flows. But what I'm proposing here is something even like that's maybe a blend of Texas, Acadiana, Gulf Coast, and the Panhandle of Florida, which is what I'm calling the Mardi Gras Belt. This is a sub-region that, for some areas, even centuries at this point, have had a Mardi Gras tradition. Not necessarily continuously. It's really been since the late 19th century that we've had more continuity of Mardi Gras, but off and on for a couple centuries at this point. A lot of these older port cities, where you have a lot of colonization, people come and go in these areas, all those things kind of bring these different practices together. And so that's what I'm proposing here, to look at some examples of maybe less obvious places where this happens, and to counter really the New Orleans-centric narrative that people typically associate with this region. But to backtrack a little bit, let me actually kind of explain, hey, you can grab some beads if you would like, explain what Mardi Gras actually is in this kind of area. So technically speaking, it is called Carnival, capital C Carnival, right? You have lower C Carnival, which you think of maybe like the circus or the fair. Sure, those are carnivals, but capital C Carnival is a season of celebration that in this case, in this particular tradition at least, leads up to Fat Tuesday, Mardi Gras Day. But people in the South just call it Mardi Gras. You don't really usually hear people use the term carnival very often in this case. It used to, they did, but most people just call it Mardi Gras for short. Oftentimes in these traditions, at least, you see some sort of controlled disorder. That's the stereotype, right? People get wasted, throw the beads around, things like that. New Orleans stereotypes, often also with social critique. There are often usually confrontation of current events and politics in these events. And it's often some sort of celebration of freedom. So these are common characteristics of this particular type of carnival tradition. Some of these things also do carry over to different regions and cultures, but not all of these do. This is not necessarily the same thing. Sometimes they happen in early summer. You also have different winter versions of carnival that sometimes happen, but for the purposes of this belt that I'm talking about, these are some of the common characteristics of this carnival tradition, or what's called more often just Mardi Gras. And so in this belt, probably the oldest traditions are New Orleans in terms of continuity at this point, and Mobile kind of, those are the two I think that most consistently have influenced each other. Some of these other traditions, like Pensacola claims they've had one that happened in 1786, but it's really the New Orleans tourism model in more recent history that these cities have started to emulate. All right, so that's kind of what we're going to be looking at, are these more recent examples of how these cities are, yes, claiming their own history of this Mardi Gras, but how are they borrowing from some of the New Orleans aesthetics? But what are they doing to also make it their own again, right? Like through music, for example. What are some of these local intricacies that unify all this to be a Mardi Gras belt, but also within it still some diversity of expression? But just to kind of, very quickly give New Orleans their flowers. They'll get about 5 seconds in this presentation. So you have some traditions like the black masking Indians, or sometimes called the Mardi Gras Indians. You have the mask, right, the green, gold, purple colors. You have the brass band leading the people dancing behind them. That's called the second line tradition. You have the French Quarter. This is typically, if you asked like someone not from the US or someone like from other parts of the country, this is probably what they're thinking of, right? This is very stereotypically that. The other thing, too, is the tradition of jazz in New Orleans in particular, too, that goes with that. This is very stereotypically like what people associate with this kind of tradition. So we're going to recap probably the most iconic song that a person would know from this, which is When the Saints Go Marching In, and you're going to sing it with me, right? So we're going to have Mr. Louis Armstrong lead us through this, and when he tells us to sing, we're going to sing with them, all right? On the screen. When the saints go marching in, now when the saints go marching in, yes, I want to be in that number. When the saints go marching in. All right, great. Give yourself a round of applause. Awesome. Knocked it out, right? So this is a song that's very widely popularized, as are these kind of aesthetics for tourism purposes especially, right? This is kind of the blueprint that a lot of these other parts of what I'm calling the Mardi Gras belt have tried to adapt in recent memory. So my question that I want to raise, though, is beyond that kind of aesthetic, what else does the Mardi Gras belt sound like, right? Even in New Orleans itself, in the parades, that's not all you hear. There are lots of local civic organizations that bring other genres into literal play. So to demonstrate the actual diversity of repertoires that you hear, as well as to demonstrate geographically what I mean by the Mardi Gras belt, we're going to look at case studies, very broad surface level examples from Mobile, Alabama, Galveston, Texas, as well as Pensacola, Florida, because these are places that people probably would not expect this to be happening in. Also, as a researcher, this is important to disclose as well. I actually have a lot of personal connections to all of these regions as well. I grew up in Mobile, Alabama as a high school college student and marched in the Mardi Gras parades as a band kid. Ancestrally, I have roots in northern Mexico and South Texas and still have modern family there today. So I have lived in Texas at different points as well. And I've been to Pensacola quite a bit, having lived in Mobile, and went to grad school in Tallahassee, so spent a lot of time in the Florida Panhandle as well. So I have roots past and present all across this region, which therefore informs my take on where I see these connections. So I just wanted to explain that, because it is a meaningful touch that this project brings to me in that way. So we'll start with first the city that I kind of consider the closest thing to a hometown for me, which is Mobile, Alabama. They have an interesting origin narrative that I'm happy to talk more about maybe in the Q&A of supposedly having this claim to having the oldest U.S. Mardi Gras. They date theirs to 1703, which does technically predate the settlement of New Orleans. And it's an interesting mythology. The other claim that they have to supposedly starting Mardi Gras was that their New Year's Eve organization, the Cowbellions, went over to New Orleans and helped the Mardi Gras organization, the Crew of Comus, start the parade and ball model. So those are a couple things that they supposedly claim makes them the oldest in different ways. But I have a bead that you're welcome to look at and pass it around that shows that 1703. But again, that's like the dominant narrative. They're using a lot of the New Orleans-derived repertoire. But what I'm interested in, again, are things that kind of challenge these narratives, right? Things that are bringing back histories that have been there, actually, for a while. And that, in this case, there's an organization that the last couple of years, the Greater Gulf Coast Caribbean Culture and Arts Festival, this was actually founded by families who were very prominent in the traditional Mardi Gras community. These are either people from Mobile that have married people that are from the Caribbean or second and third generation Caribbean Americans, right? So they're trying to bridge this traditional Mardi Gras French colonization narrative with what they're also experiencing in other parts of their identity, right? And these are, Trinidad and Tobago, there's members from Haiti. It's sort of a pan-Caribbean narrative that they're bringing into this, which is really interesting to me. But one genre in particular that they're starting to do in their own separate Caribbean carnival, but also trying to bring into the traditional Mardi Gras balls and parades as well, like the floats, is soca, right? So soca comes from, again, the capital C carnival, right? Not lowercase, capital C, Trinidad and Tobago. It's been around, formally at least, since things like the 70s. And we're going to listen to an example in a second of some soca playing in a Mobile parade. And as you do, listen to how fast it is, listen to the pulsation in it that gets people dancing, and really listen for how this music aesthetically gets people moving, right? It's really important for things like these processional practices. So this is from the 2025 Road March in Mobile last year that I filmed. And this was the big soca song that was released that year as part of Capital C Carnival, Party by Michelle Montano. He's a big name soca artist. So let's take a little bit of a listen and listen for that big pulsation, watch as people dance and interact with this track. And again, this is a recording being played at this parade. Yeah, so you hear that da-da-da-da-da, very fast, getting people moving, right? This is perfect processional kind of music, right? You heard the DJ who was playing this recording, getting people as well, directing these groups called bands to get moving. And so this is, again, an interesting, practice that is being put in conversation with the typical, Mardi Gras parades with this kind of capital C carnival, right? So this is an interesting kind of bridging that they're trying to do in this scene. But again, this is not something that stereotypically people are going to think of as U.S. Mardi Gras, right? That's what I'm trying to get at here, is there are other things going on besides the second line and jazz aesthetics in this Mardi Gras belt. So that's just one example. The second example of, again, you see this interesting bridging of different celebratory practices is in Galveston, Texas with Fiesta Gras. So they have a Mardi Gras season that does, again, they actually literally import a lot of their stuff from New Orleans, like the floats and things like that. But there's a couple days where they try to give nod to Hispanic culture in Texas, right? That means, as you can see, this is from their website, the aesthetics in terms of dress and the procession, but also musically they do that too. So again, this is kind of countering that narrative of what people conceive of as Mardi Gras in an interesting way. In 2026, these were the two groups. We'll talk more about the headliner, Little Joe, in just one second. But in these couple days of the season, they usually do a lot of norteño musics, meaning borderland musics, right? Like music from northern Mexico, South Texas. And that means that this kind of music is very Texas in the way it brings all these different styles together. Blues, conjunto, German and Czech polka, a lot of pop, rock, and rap aesthetics as well are making into this. And again, that is very Texas, very, very Texas in that way. And then it usually features Tejano musicians. And Tejano, just to clarify, is a complex term, kind of like the term Creole. It's changed meaning over time, but today they mostly use that to mean Texans of Mexican descent. And so the headliner in the 2026 Mardi Gras was Little Joe. His full name is Jose Maria de Leon Hernandez. He was born in Temple, Texas, and he's known as King of the Brown Sound. And he's a Grammy-winning, like a very accomplished musician, right? So to have someone of that caliber performing at this Mardi Gras, again, is a huge like acknowledgement of this kind of very local practice. But again, you don't expect that stereotypically in things like Mardi Gras, coming from fiesta culture. We're going to listen to a little bit of his performance, or one of his songs that he performed at this year's Fiesta Gras. It's a song that he's pretty well known for called Redneck Mexican Boy. And you're going to hear a lot of those blends that I'm talking about here. A little bit of rock, a little bit of country, a little bit of that oompa, oompa, like kind of polka pulsation. So this is very, again, like Texas. We're just going to listen to a little bit of the first verse. The lyrics are up here.
Just like wait, there is something you should know. Here's a drinking of the Texas kind, that in Texas women bring me joy. Through this arc of old mountain bridge, I'm just a good old redneck Mexican boy.
So, yes, it is the most Texas thing ever, yeah. So, but you see, again, this interesting merging of like, yes, you have this from Tejano culture. Performances like this do happen like at Fiesta, like the most famous and biggest one is in San Antonio. But you see the purple, gold, and green imported from New Orleans, right? This is where, again, kind of like the Mobile, when you see this interesting, like trying to bridge of different festive practices in this spectrum of the Mardi Gras belt. And so that's just one example. He did perform some maybe more traditional tunes as well, but I just think that one is an interesting like example of all these different styles coming together in that song. The third example as well is over in Florida, the Pensacola Mardi Gras tradition. And so this is actually now a formal incorporation in probably like the last 20, 25 years, Pensacola Mardi Gras Inc. that took over from a previous organization that had helped with revamping it in the last 40 or so years. But again, you see in the logo that importation from the New Orleans tourism aesthetics, right, coming at play here. But in this tradition, they also, again, have a claim as well to like late 19th century, like attempts at least to have their Mardi Gras. There's a lot of debate about the first king, whether it was like 1890s or right at the turn of the century. But again, this tradition goes back further than people might expect. But it's really, again, kind of like Pensacola, and I would say even in Galveston, it's really been the last 40 or so years that they've had more continuity in their tradition. And so there's a lot of interest in, again, things like tourism that are tied to this. But in this particular case, there's one place that if you go to Pensacola that you absolutely have to go to, which is McGuire's Irish Pub. Yeah, so it has been around since the 70s, and it's in like a historic landmark at this point, but there's some like quirks it has to it, right? Like you have this Irish atmosphere brewery, but there's things like I think you have to kiss a moose when you go there. You have to staple dollar bills to the ceiling as pictured here. This is just sort of, again, like a place that you go to if you go to Pensacola. So that's the institution itself. But they actually have an extension of it, bless you, that plays in their Mardi Gras as well as other civic functions, which is their pipe band. And so there's an interesting conflation here of Scottishness and Irishness that's going on. But they have been around for quite a while at this point. They actually do go play in some of the other Mardi Gras as well. They've come to Mobile. I wouldn't be surprised if they've been to New Orleans as well. So again, you see this kind of circuit of exchange. But they do compete in like the regional bagpipe competitions. There's another city in Florida that also is really well known for having like a strong Scottish migration pattern. So it's not, again, unheard of in kind of central Panhandle, Florida, but it's a very loud sonic representation of this very local, quirky place that performs in this Mardi Gras, right? Kind of a similar idea, though, to what I was talking about in Mobile. There's also an interesting organizational partnership happening here, which is the Pensacola Celtic Society. This is, from what I've gathered at least, a more recent effort to have more cultural programming in the community, to like have, especially Scottish and Irish, like things like music, like this bagpipe band they partner with sometimes, programming in things like Mardi Gras as well as other public events. And so that's an interesting partnership. I'll be curious to see where it goes. As you can see, it was established fairly recently in 2024. So I'm really excited to see where that goes. But the band itself has been around for quite a while at this point. And so thinking about here, the repertoire question that I'm bringing into play here, since we started with When the Saints Go Marching In, and we're also going to end with that, but the bagpipe version. So this is, again, this right here demonstrates this idea of play here, right? Like you have this blueprint that's been popularized from this like stereotypical Mardi Gras framework, and these different groups are kind of making it their own. So prepare your ears, but this is the bagpipe version of When the Saints Go Marching In. And obviously it's right off the beach, so you're gonna hear some wind. So I do apologize, but that's just what happens when you're in a beach city. Yeah, so I thought it would be an interesting full circle thing in terms of the musical examples to recap with that, a different version of, the iconic tune popularized by New Orleans. But just kind of broadening back out here, right? Like these are just three very small examples, three very small places where this practice has been around off and on, at least in more recent memory since the late 19th century. But in really the last 30, 40 years, these more solidified forms of Mardi Gras are taking interesting shape to me. And I think music is a really great way to kind of compare like these things. And again, that's not to say that New Orleans doesn't have this either. You hear all kinds of music, maybe like this, other things that also happen in that very prominent Mardi Gras. But I think also looking at it in different places really shows kind of these interrelationships, but also differences that comprise this kind of region that I'm calling the Mardi Gras belt within the South. So those are just a few snippets, but I will open it up for questions. Thank y'all very much. And for those of you online, I also have the chat up, so if you have questions, I can also answer those. So, but anyway, Ashley has the microphone. She'll walk around for any in-person questions.
Thank you, Emily. This was lovely. Sorry I was late.
You're good. Thanks for
I am fascinated by Little Joe and the song that you presented. Like, what are your take on these lyrics? Because, like, okay, he said something about 15 years of picking cotton. I'm like, whoa, wait, whoa. What was that? Like, what's that about? I'm wondering just, like, the background, maybe, if you could bring any context to it.
Yeah, I've looked up kind of commentary like on this song, and it's just very self-aware, like positionality in Texas of like where do I fit with these like very white like aesthetics that he's growing up around, but then also obviously with previous histories of things like classism and racism, like the 15 years of picking cotton, you know, doing that kind of thing. So it's kind of a play at bringing, I think, those things within himself that I've gathered, like bringing attention to that, and like almost like satire.
Yeah,
like it
so I was
seems
about
like
to say that. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, like a satirical, like self-aware song, and the fact that he's singing it at a Mardi Gras.
It's so like, whoa, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that kind of points to like the social critique thing a little bit, but in like a self-mockery, satirical kind of way.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I got one more question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, totally.
I was just wondering around, I guess, like, because you're at the Mardi Gras, do you know who's choosing the repertoire, like what they're playing, or kind of like, I guess, if you have any context?
Yeah, I can speak to the Mobile tradition at least, and the parades. Those are very curated by the organizers of the parades, and I assume that other cities probably do it similarly. From what I've gathered, at least with talking to some of the DJs in Mobile, they have to run their playlist by the organizers. Because at least in Mobile, they claim to have this like very family-friendly kind of practice. I can't say for sure that all of them are quite that strict on what's played, but I would assume that they still have to run to an extent what they're singing and playing by, you know, the organized to an extent. But Mobile's is also like much more controlled, I think, than some of these other ones.
That makes sense.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense given the history. Okay, I think I probably do have another question, but I'll...
Thank you, Aisha.
Thank you, Emily. I love the diversity of these case studies, and I'm wondering, especially looking at the third case study in Pensacola and the involvement of the Pensacola Celtic Society, do you get a sense that perhaps there's more of a tie to Catholicism in this particular one, versus like maybe a truer spirit of Mardi Gras as like challenging cultural commentary and like going against the establishment versus leaning into leading up to Lenten season?
Yeah, I could definitely see that because a lot of these cities do have like those old Catholic roots for sure. So I haven't had a chance to directly speak with the Celtic Society yet. That's on my list, but that would not surprise me in a lot of ways. Though a lot of these are in practice pretty removed from the Catholic basis, but that doesn't mean they're not trying to bring that back in either. So, but yeah, a lot of these are pretty secular in terms of execution. But yeah, that's a good point. I'll have to think on that. Thank you.
Hello. Earlier in your presentation, you had a map, I know of the Deep South, we got that. But you had a map, I think, about Mardi Gras celebrations. Go back a little bit. Hold on. There's another map that you had. But anyway, it looked like there was like another kind of outlier state. Okay, one more. New Mexico. And I was just kind of like, I know that you had said that it was like southern states, but I was just like, for what we were talking about, Mexico, like Texas, and did you see anything in New Mexico in terms of Mardi Gras or some of the traditions about it? I was just wondering because I saw New Mexico out there.
Yeah, I haven't looked in New Mexico yet. That's why I like showing different maps because there's so much subjectivity, right? Like as to where these ebbs and flows are. I'm sure it would not surprise me if there is one there, to be honest, because you're even finding it in places in the West like California. Again, these exports mainly from New Orleans. So I, again, would not be surprised. I'm sure there's some sort of type of capital C carnival. Whether it's actually kind of this brand, I need to look into. But yeah, I would not be surprised, to be honest with you. Yeah.
I have a question. So it's this celebratory time. It's a time to kind of engage in revelry, social commentary. I guess if I was going to add something to the list of things I associate with the South from towards the beginning,
Right.
I would add weather, particularly hurricanes. Now, of course, Katrina is a big one that comes to mind with New Orleans, but we're talking a lot about referentiality, and I'm just sort of wondering, I don't know how far back your field work goes, but because I was pretty young when Katrina happened, but
Same.
I'm sort of wondering if there's any musical referentiality to anything that maybe has or has not disrupted Mardi Gras celebrations, not just in New Orleans, but across the belt. Or COVID would be another, so not just weather, but yeah.
There's a lot of, this is not exclusive to Mardi Gras, but there's a lot of references to things like the Civil War ending celebrations in very interesting ways. So there's that kind of like lost cause kind of stuff that comes into some of this. A lot of them talk about as well how the First and Second World War like interrupted that in terms of the historiography. But in terms of the music, I think I see more of the lost cause kind of stuff. Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans did a lot of like performances, not even just in Mardi Gras, but there are songs, like especially in like Bounce and whatnot, that do acknowledge that. The other cities in this region, they may have gotten some of Katrina. Like I went through Katrina directly in Alabama, and we didn't get it quite as bad. We did go a few weeks without power, but I don't remember necessarily the rest of the region having as strong of a reaction as like obviously New Orleans did. So I think that kind of like trauma response was most vocally sonified in New Orleans. But there have been, again, like kind of other events, I think that, going back to the idea of social critique, they're always responding to what's going on in real time. There's always some sort of satirical Mardi Gras organization that, whether it's through music or chanting or something, they're addressing what's going on in real time. So I'm sure there's been micro moments of that, like continuously, but in terms of like, those loud interruptions, like I think New Orleans, like the Katrina example, is probably the most vocal, literally, about it. So, yeah.
So if we can talk a bit about I think it was Mobile, where you had the Caribbean
Yes, pulling
element
that.
as well. So you talked as well about, I think in the answer to the first set of questions, the curation of the music, but the clip you showed was of the parade.
Mm-hmm.
So as someone who studies these Caribbean carnivals in South Carolina in particular, I'm kind of interested in the response of either spectators, non-Caribbean spectators, or officials, city officials, because the clip you showed is, bikini and backsides. And not, in a true Caribbean sense, not the petite
Right.
models. So I wonder if you can talk about that, and maybe also talk about, like, what does it structurally look like in terms of the organization, and if there is a true partnership?
Yeah, so I'll start with the city. This particular organization has actually been doing a really good job of getting the city's backing. Like Visit Mobile, I think, or at least the city itself has helped sponsor it. And this is happening in May. I should, clarify, after the formal January to February or March Mardi Gras season. So they do have their own kind of stamp on this. They usually have, so far, like a Friday night party, an all-day, like, Saturday festival that is preceded by the road march. So they'll march through downtown to wherever they're holding the site of this event at the time. And then they'll have like an after party Saturday night, and then like a Sunday morning like brunch gathering. So it is a whole weekend thing. And so that's the general layout, and they're curating it. So they have a lot of like autonomy in terms of what they want to play or perform themselves, which is great, actually. That's very different from the stricter elements I've seen in the more traditional Mardi Gras. So there's sort of like a nice like liberatory, I think, thing going on there sonically. In terms of like the reception from the like more traditional like Mardi Gras organizations, a lot of the leaders of this group are like from old family lines that go really far back in Mobile. So I think they're trying to like bring like through their own like positionality these practices into the parades. Like I saw there was like kind of a Pan-Caribbean themed float in one of the Black Mardi Gras parades, which was a big deal. I hadn't seen that yet. And so I think it's at the moment, from what I've gathered, on these individuals that are in this group to use their personal networks and positionality of power that they have in the Mardi Gras to bring these things into the balls. In terms of the music, I'm not seeing much of that yet beyond this event, other than like that float that we're playing, a lot of repertoire for sure. But this one is a lot more like participatory of a parade than the Mardi Gras ones. The Mardi Gras ones, there's a very clear hierarchy of you are a spectator, the elite are in the float parades. You don't get to dance with them. There's just this very clear, like, literal hierarchy going on there. So I would say this one's a lot more like free form, maybe compared to that, which I find interesting in terms of how this is being embodied within the sound. They are, though, trying to partner with other cities. So a lot of people from Pensacola come over for this. Birmingham's organization is actually older than Mobile's. A lot of the Birmingham folks come down to help with this. So statewide, it's doing very well. They actually got, this organization helped the Birmingham one get Caribbean Heritage Month recognized at the state level. So there's a lot at the state level that they're starting to take off too. But again, it's in terms of its like integration with the other carnival, it's still its own thing mostly, but I think they're trying to merge that more. So yeah, a lot of dynamics that are in play right now, like literally. Mandy Schlegel online had a question. She says, I wonder about the South Asian influence on Mardi Gras. Also, how do South American carnivals align? So just kind of bringing in, she said specifically Vietnamese influence on New Orleans Mardi Gras. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. There's also a big, I think, Vietnamese population in Mobile as well. I think there might be sort of like as these different crews or mystic societies, as they're called in Mobile, develop, there's probably, I would venture, like some smaller ones, I would guess in New Orleans, that are part of that. To my knowledge, there's not like a consistent like overt representation of that, like in terms of the big floats, but it's grown so much that I wouldn't be surprised if there's like some sort of, at least in New Orleans, like a smaller scale like organization, like a crew. And then the South American Carnival one. Yeah, there's some interesting attempts to bring that in as well. Like I'll speak to the Mobile one. There's actually a samba group now that is playing all the time in Mobile's parades. But it took a local brass band from Mobile to make that happen. So again, it's kind of on these older practitioners to try to be the advocate for bringing these different styles in. So that's kind of an interesting like Brazilian influence that I'm seeing. So I think, and I think in New Orleans as well, I've seen like some one-off groups like that bringing in, especially Brazilian influences. And I have a colleague out there right now that's like a Brazilian specialist. I know he's getting pretty involved in like the Brazilian demographic in New Orleans, so I'll have to ask him like how involved they all are with playing in Mardi Gras proper. But I think I'm talking like about the formal parades, but Mardi Gras is also informal. Like anything that happens in the neighborhoods, anything that happens in like clubs, all of that is still carnival. So I would say like certainly, at least in maybe these smaller spaces, all of this is probably going on, right, in some shape or form. It's just maybe in terms of the formal programming and the privileged positions within it, maybe not always being part of that. So, yeah, great question. Thank you, Mandy. Dr. Johnson.
Hello, thank you for this presentation. As we're talking, I think I just have a comment. I don't think I have a question. It seems like your work is allowing us to see the diversity of Southern identities.
Yes.
And the variances. And you have various generations coming in and immigrant cultures coming in and people embracing those things. And I think it pokes at another stereotype of the South as being a bastion of racism and xenophobia.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about some of the work that Fredera Hadley is working on in Florida. She's thinking about Florida as multiple Floridas, and going through it regionally, looking at how different cultures have had different identities based on where you are in the state.
Yes.
Over the last couple of centuries. And this mapping you're giving us is providing a huge swath of that.
Yeah.
And I think what you poked at a little bit is beyond the existence of these things happening in these communities, the buy-in from the local municipalities has always been a thing.
Yes.
And so whereas corporations and media culture tells you that diversity and all this inclusion is bad for business, you have smaller cities and localities say, no, this is actually great for our economies, and we need to be embracing this because there is no Superman coming to save our economies. We have to look inward to our communities. So it seems like you're kind of exposing that as well, because I remember when Columbia first started their hip hop, Love, Peace, and Hip Hop Festival, and I was very surprised coming here, having lived in Atlanta, Los Angeles, and Syracuse, and seeing how Columbia, fully on the city level down, openly had blocks blocked off for this whole festival all day long, not overbearing police presence. People made it a family day, and they put money into it. And I told students here, I said, this doesn't happen in other parts of the country. It's very still villainized, even though it's over 50 years old. But seeing how the city of Columbia said, no, this is how we bring people together. This is how we bring money into the city for a whole day and just have a good time. And so I think you're revealing that in a multivalent ways. So it's very interesting. I just want to say, good job.
Thank you. Yeah. The tourism part is certainly part of it. And I think one of the founders of this organization, you know, I kind of asked her, I was like, why now? Like, why did y'all wait? Like, all of this has always technically been part of Mardi Gras history. This is not technically new, like this Caribbean influence. But I was like, why are you just now like formalizing it? And she's like, we just now feel like we're able to. Like, she didn't feel like that they would have gotten any kind of support before now. So I think you're right. Like, there's probably that component at play here, the tourism component that's helping, hopefully, with it. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming, and have a good afternoon. Thank you, everyone on the live stream.